eyebrows rather than her eyes because it's red.
All right, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today for the final session of the Parbery webinar series. Before I get started today, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to extend a particular warm welcome to and respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So this brings us to the conclusion of the last session in the webinar series for Parbery. As I've said before, at the beginning of each one of the presentations, we have Kim, who is our partner. He looks after what we call the business delivery part of the business, of which change management is a function of. There's Michelle Wicks and myself who work as principals within the change practice. And then we have a talented team of changes that work alongside us. Over the last 5 weeks, we've been lucky enough to be joined by Kim, Michelle, Christina and Taylor. Unfortunately, it's a very busy time of the year for us here at Parbery, and everyone is tied up on client site. So you just got me for today. So I encourage you to step in, ask questions if you have any. And just feel free to jump off mic because I am just working off the one laptop today, which provides a little bit of technical issues as far as being able to see the messages in Teams. So just jump in and interrupt me and if you have any questions. So over the last 5 weeks, we've gone through essentially the assessment phase and delivery phase for change management, starting through from your business case or pre-gate zero, depending on what methodology you work in, all the way through into your delivery, evaluation, review, embed, sustain component, and looked at the effort, the work, the activities, and some of the benefits that come out of this. Today we're going to be focusing on measuring and reporting. It's a very important part of what we do here at Parbery, because I'll roll back a little bit to the very first presentation we did, where we talked about Parbery and what we think makes us different. And at the very core of what we do from a change management perspective here is the vision is applying an evidence-based approach to transform how change is managed across government. So we want to be specifically quantifiable in what we do within the change management space, as you would expect any other aspect of the business, any other activity to be so. So, and then obviously what we want to be able to do is use that evidence to empower our leaders to change using evidence-based data and driven insights. So, data and evidence is at the core of what we do at Parbery. So management and reporting is obviously that component. So if we look at a standard project health card, quite often what you would see in your normal project reporting cycles is, your PM, normally the person that is doing this, whether it be a project manager or a program manager. But essentially, realistically, what a project manager, program manager, they're really responsible for time, money, scope, or budget, schedule, and resources. And that's the 3 levers they typically pull, and then managing the risks and issues around the contingencies of the project. But I would argue that there's a whole nother set of criteria that we'll be looking at from a change perspective, around how well are we managing that change, and how are we on track to deliver our benefits. Because more often than not, if you're just looking at particularly time and scope and money, the natural tendency over time for projects is to reduce scope to maintain budget, and quite often reducing scope reduces benefits. And also by changing your scope, you're potentially impacting your key stakeholders and people that will be consuming the change. So there should be, and I think I've mentioned a couple of times, my belief is there should be a healthy tension between your project manager, program manager, and your change manager. We're interested in different aspects, both trying to get a result for the business to deliver a capability. One is very necessarily making sure that they're keeping us tied to the ground and on track to do something. And the change manager is obviously, in my mind, working as an advocate for the business within the project. So, trying to argue up the solution more often than not on behalf of our stakeholders. And, somewhere in the middle is where you get the best kind of solution. So how do we keep a track of our resourcing? So the thing is, when we actually look at measuring change, you can do your head in on this, quite frankly. And I've seen some incredibly complicated spreadsheets and metrics and, VLOOKUPs and ifs and pivot tables and, all the rest of the jazz, because depending on the size of your program and the complexity and the size of your organization, you can end up with many, many interdependent relationships that can be quite difficult to measure. I would argue what we need to be doing is finding the right level. So it's always the right fit. There's no point in having a tool where we're in a situation where we're down into the minute detail and all we do is update a spreadsheet all day, every day, to track where we think people might be, but we can't have zero data as well. But it requires clarity on what the change is, most importantly. So we're going to have a bit of a look at the why, who, how. These are really, really important things. So you can't really measure your success until you understand why the change needs to be happen. You've done your impact assessment and you've looked at who, and you've established the how. So by the time we get into the measurement side of things, we're generally in that strategizing phase. So you don't do your reporting pre-gate zero. You do it once you're actually into doing your change impact assessment. You're establishing, why the change needs to be happen. You're establishing the benefits that go along with that. You're looking at the who. So who are the people that are going to be impacted? What's their readiness? Where are they up to? Where do we need to move them to? And the how. And we talked about change impact extensively in session number 2. But this is where you're pulling that data from to set up your initial reporting. So moving on from that, if there's no questions, I'll just double check. No. So, all right. Moving on, for looking at the reporting side of activities, we're now overlaying a number of the tools that we've talked about in the previous sessions around our aligning to the project schedule, identifying where our key milestones are, and then we're looking at what the start, stop, and continue activities are throughout that project life cycle, and then we're tracking back against that. So whether we're looking through initiate, we're looking through plan, it could be post gate 1 or post gate 0, gate 2, etc., etc. So this is an approximated plan of just looking at essentially, hypothetically, here's a project. So where are we up to? Have we developed our new organizational design? Are we ready to develop and test support scripts? Are we ready to do, have we trained our UAT testers? Have we got our training ready? Have we got our process manuals ready? So what we're doing is we're folding all of the reporting in and attaching it to the key milestones. This is also really, really important, and I've been going through this a lot personally recently with a project that I've been working on. I'm looking after change training and comms for a reasonable size army program at the moment. And I've been picking up from predecessors and just looking at where things are up to. And what's become very apparent is when the schedule has been developed as a result of that project, a lot of the training, particularly communications products, and to an extent some of the change activities, were not connected to the right change milestone. Right. So as the project has shifted around on its deliveries, everything has shifted to the right. Probably not a surprise in a defence project, just between you, me, and the gatepost. But when those things have shifted to the right, which many of them are inputs that we're contingent on to, let's say, develop training. You can't develop your training until you know what your solution is. If you don't know what your solution is, what are you training on? But the solutioning has shifted, but the training deliverable hasn't. So now we're going through some very interesting conversations around training deliverables being required at a point in time before the solution is even fully defined, which is, you shouldn't be in a rational conversation, but it's turning out to be quite difficult. Who knew? But anyway, I digress. So the key takeaway here is connect to your right key change milestone, understand the activities that you're going to be looking at. So when do people need to start doing a new thing? When do people need to stop doing a new thing? And when do they continue? The continue aspect of it is an important one as well. And I know I've touched it on in previous sessions, but quite often when we actually go and change someone's job, unless it's a material restructure or a major change to an organisation, if it's a new IT system or it's a new process or it's a new, even if you're mobbed and you're in a new department, your underlying functions quite often remain the same. So people will feel a lot more comfortable if you can turn around to them and say, look, 70% of what you do on a day-to-day basis is still the same. It's just the interface that you're potentially using to process that transaction, or it's just the system that's going to be a little bit different. But your inputs, your downstream outputs, still the same, just in a slightly different environment. That can make people feel a little bit more comfortable about change as well. So it allows it to be not so big and scary. So we are getting through this at breakneck pace, but just as a bit of a tool and a takeaway, if you are about to go through a change and you wanted to look at setting up some basic reporting, one of the things I'd certainly encourage you to do in those early phases is have a look at your stakeholders and where they need to be across the various different groups and milestones. This gives you a basic template, so you can have if you're doing let's say a program of work, you might have multiple projects in that. If it's a portfolio, you might have multiple programs as well as many, many projects. But essentially looking at the stakeholder group that would be impacted, what milestone that's attached to, and then setting where you would like them to be when you go live. And then what you can do is you can do a range of different assessments, right? You could start with a desktop assessment. I always kind of like the finger in the air kind of approach, where you're sort of not taking up huge amounts of time, and you make a bunch of assumptions. You obviously need to very much go and validate those assumptions on the way through. But if you're just looking for a baseline or a starting point, desktop assessments are great. And then you go away and validate it. But at least when you're validating, you're starting with a populated page and people are able to contribute to it. You can do things like surveys, focus groups, sentiment analysis, tests, town halls. Mentimeter is a great one if you want to do a town hall where people can add in anonymously. But you're going to start to build a library of data. So you're using evidence-based activities. And then you're going to obviously have it time constrained because it's going to need to match up with whatever the project schedule looks like. So really, really simple tool, something you could probably put together with a couple of SMEs within the business, and a few key individuals in a day, half a day. You could baseline this, and you'd be easily able to continue to track through. I don't see any questions at the moment, so we'll keep going. So some other types of measurement that you can certainly consider, and again, this is where we get into setting the criteria at the beginning of your project, so in that strategize phase, and right-sizing whatever the approach might be that you want to. Different cultures, different complexities, different projects, all have different appetites for the level of reporting that you might want to be delivering to them. And even different executives have different wants on what sort of reporting they're interested in. But stakeholder sentiment, certainly one that we can look at. of where they are on the scale. So that's what we sort of talk through in the tool. Having a look at a change pattern. So starting to break down and look at various different swim lanes. So if you've got a cultural swim lane, an ICT, a process, etc., you could actually start to break and look at how ready is the business for each one of those criteria. And when we did the change impact assessment, that would be your baseline to look across those various different lenses. And then obviously you're trying to track them or move them to where they need to be to achieve the success. And benefit realization. So benefit realization, in my opinion, in full disclosure, I'm an ex-finance person as well. Benefit realization to me needs to be tied to a financial benefit. And there's a natural phase in a project where you're spending, and you're not delivering anything. So obviously your cost of benefit is negative. But once you start to do your implementation and you embed and sustain, you should see those benefits roll back into the business, and you should be able to see some sort of improvement across hopefully a financial aspect, but there's a number of different ways that you could quantify this as well. So we could be looking at things like, customer satisfaction through surveys. We all love those, I know. Every time I do anything on my phone these days, apparently I need to fill in a survey as well. It feels like apps have become very needy to me, but anyway, that's an aside. But we could be looking at customer feedback. We could be looking at operational lead time. So are we meeting all of our SLAs? Are we exceeding our SLAs? Or what's the overall sentiment within the executive? And that can be done by an internal survey, or most importantly, you could go and talk to the staff on the ground and get first-hand experience around how they're finding the new system. And you can roll all of that up and sort of present that back to say, look, we've got a financial benefit, or we've increased our customer satisfaction, and we've reduced our wait times, or whatever it might be. But again, whatever you want to report on at the end of your project, it's absolutely critical to define it in that strategy phase. Get agreement on it and baseline it, because once you start reporting, you need to maintain that consistency, and keep the same data set across all of your reporting. Nothing is worse, and I've seen change managers do this, where they get halfway through a project and they change their survey questions, or they change their data points, or they change where they're drawing the data from. And the problem is, the minute you do that, you don't have a like-for-like comparison, and it invalidates your results. So that concludes this. That concludes our session for today, as well as the Parbery webinar series as a whole. So the next steps from here, if there are no questions, is we're actually producing a YouTube channel, producing some YouTube clips out of the recorded sessions that we've done over the last 6 weeks. And I'll be emailing out the consolidated slide deck, a link to the YouTube videos if you'd like to review them. And obviously at any point in time, you can contact myself or any of the wonderful change managers we have here at Parbery. So if there's no questions, I will say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure over the last 6 weeks, and have a great Easter, everybody.